In this video, we'll explore the time period from around 1700 to 1390 BC. That is, from the start of Egypt's second intermediate period up until midway through the first dynasty of Egypt's new kingdom, the 18th dynasty. We'll take leave shortly before the Amarna revolution wrought by the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten. I hope to cover that and more in the next video. The period under discussion for this video starts with a divided Egypt in which the 15th dynasty Hyksos emerge, only to be knocked out by the Theban-based 17th dynasty, ushering in Egypt's new kingdom, a time period when Egypt subjugated Nubia more fully than ever before, and expanded up the Levant, entering into the larger diplomatic world of all the major Near Eastern powers, Hatti, Mitanni, Babylon, and Ashur. But let's begin with considering the intermediate period, this period of divided rule. Egypt's second intermediate period lasted from the end of unified rule over Egypt around 1700 BC until in middle of the reign of the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, Pharaoh Ahmose, who, after coming to the throne around 1550 BC, set out and defeated the Hyksos, returning Egypt to unified rule. This around 150-year period saw 5 dynasties, the 13th through 17th. The 13th dynasty is the continuation of the End Middle Kingdom's 13th dynasty, only now they rule in the south from Thebes, having left behind their former capital, Ijtawi. They would last until around 1650, around which time the 17th dynasty would succeed them, ruling until 1550 when Ahmose came to the throne. Meanwhile, the 14th and 16th dynasties consisted of minor rulers, largely in the north. The 14th from 1700 to 1650, and then the 16th from 1650 through 1580. The major northern power player during this period picked up around 1650 as well. These are the 15th dynasty Hyksos, and they rule from 1650 to shortly after 1550 when Ahmose came trundling in on a mission. Just a note, I'm mostly following Van de Meeroop's recent textbook when considering the dates of these dynasties, though debate abounds for the intermediate period. And while he has it that the 14th and then 16th dynasties consisted of minor rulers, at least mostly situated in the north, another line of thinking places the 16th dynasty in the south in Thebes, spanning around 70 years before the 17th dynasty would finally arise. These disagreements lead to the placing of certain pharaohs into different dynasties. That said, following this textbook, the 16th dynasty actually occurred mostly in the north and didn't follow the 13th dynasty, and instead the 17th dynasty followed the 13th, ruling from Thebes. The weakened late 13th dynasty lost control of Nubia, though some of the forts there remained occupied by Egyptians. With a more powerful power no longer leaning into Kush, the Kerma-based state flourished and encroachment in the other direction began, and Kush gained influence over Lower Nubia. The 13th dynasty was followed by the 17th dynasty, who spent most of its life cycle sandwiched between Kush to the south and the 15th dynasty to the north. The 15th dynasty are the Hyksos, those for whom a couple of their early kings self-identify with the Egyptian term used since the Old Kingdom, Hatshepsut, or rulers of foreign lands. The Delta region had seen Asiatic influence for a while now, including the town founded by Amenhotep I, Hutwaret, or Avaris. Avaris grew and became a Mediterranean trade hub. When the Hyksos arose, Avaris was their capital. Further adding to the cultural mix at this time were the nomads of the eastern desert, whose graves range from Memphis to Kerma. Some kings of this dynasty refer to themselves as Hatshepsut, and that term may have applied to some other dynasty rulers as well, depending on your dynastic placement of the given pharaohs. Despite the black and white portrayal of later Egyptian rulers and beyond, the Hyksos kings didn't shy away from Egyptian culture, including the adoption of Egyptian names and religion. The Hyksos extended their rule over the Delta and down south to the upper Egyptian town of Kuseh, which is where they would first start to be pushed back from when the last king of the 17th dynasty of Thebes, Thutmose, came to power. The northern end of the Hyksos is more difficult to detect, and when the first king of the 18th dynasty, Ahmose, finally felled them, he fought into southern Palestine. The campaign against the Hyksos started at some point in the later 17th dynasty. It may have started under the reign of its second-to-last king, Seqenenre Tao. Seqenenre's tomb refers to him as brave, and his mummy has forehead and neck wounds. Many presume these arose in conflict, perhaps in direct execution. The following king, Thutmose, campaigned both against the Hyksos, and he further campaigned down south, taking control up to the Second Cataract. But it was under the next king, the first king of the 18th dynasty and the first king of Egypt's new kingdom, Ahmose, that the Hyksos would be fully defeated and Egypt would be unified once more. Ahmose followed where his predecessor had left off with the Hyksos and with Kush. Avaris was besieged and then taken over. Avaris then became the base for Egyptian activity to the northeast. Ahmose continued into southern Palestine, which saw significant destruction around this time period from a number of possible sources, and some people attribute it to the actions of Ahmose and or one or more of the coming kings. In southern Palestine, near Gaza, he finalized the victory with the siege and defeat of the Hyksos at the Sharuan fortress. He campaigned further up the Levant as well. Ahmose put down rebellions in the south and restored the Buan fortress. While his pyramid was probably not his tomb, Ahmose had the last royal pyramid of Egypt constructed. Ahmose was followed by his son Amenhotep I, who ruled from around 1525 to 1504 BC. For a short time at the start of his reign, his mother, Ahmose Nefertari, appears to have acted as regent for him before he took charge himself. His older sister, Ahmose Merit Amon, he married as his great royal wife. He campaigned in Nubia, reaching at least close to the Third Cataract. Amenhotep I is also thought to have founded the workers' village at Deir el-Medina, where he and his mother were worshipped as the patron deities. It's the worship of the funerary cult at Deir el-Medina that brings us large numbers of statues of Amenhotep I at a later time. Amenhotep I died with no son to succeed him, and he was instead followed by Thutmose I. Thutmose I's great royal wife was Ahmose, who'd birthed the famous female pharaoh Hatshepsut. Thutmose I ruled from around 1504 to 1492 BC. He campaigned into Nubia to quell a rebellion, he ended the kingdom of Kush, and headed back with the dead king of Kush hanging upside down from his ship's mast. He further had a fortress built near the Third Cataract at Thutmose. A couple of years later, Egyptian troops reached even farther south, leaving a stele at Kirgis beyond the Fourth Cataract. He campaigned up the Levant, reaching the Euphrates River. Thutmose I, through a wife of his other than Ahmose, Mutnefret, birthed his son and successor, Thutmose II, whose dates of rule are 1492 to 1479 BC. Thutmose II's great royal wife was Hatshepsut, his half-sister through his father's aforementioned primary wife. Thutmose II had a rebellion in northern Kush put down, and there was a campaign in the Sinai under his reign. It was through a secondary wife of his, Isit, that Thutmose III was born. Thutmose III was a child when he ascended to the throne in 1479, and Hatshepsut acted as his regent. But by 1473, Hatshepsut had assumed the literal position of king, while not formally displacing Thutmose III, whose name would still be used to number Egyptian years on documents, occasionally with Hatshepsut's name as well. Hatshepsut sent a trade delegation to Punt, which she had commemorated in relief at Deir el-Bahari. She's well known for her construction projects, most gloriously her mortuary temple. An obelisk she'd ordered made started cracking mid-carving and was abandoned unfinished, leaving behind clear marks of the workers' tools. After Hatshepsut, Thutmose III properly assumed the throne in 1758 BC, and he advanced an increased militaristic approach. Under and then after Thutmose III's reign, the long-time Nubian problem fell into a long period of relatively stable Egyptian rule. But where Thutmose III stood out the most was in the north, where he made his way into Asia. He campaigned there numerous times over the course of his reign, with what was likely the biggest battle, the Battle of Megiddo, occurring early on. Megiddo was where numerous rebel vassals of the region had sought refuge, and after a 7-month siege he conquered it. This opened his path farther north and entered Egypt into the larger Near Eastern political world like never before. What's implausibly described by Thutmose as tribute, but is more reasonably the stirrings of sustained diplomatic relationships through gift-giving, came from the Hittites, Babylon, and Assyria. Some years later, he started up numerous campaigns to properly conquer in Syria, conquering and putting down rebellions, conquering more and putting down more rebellions. These rebellions were often encouraged by the nearby great power of Mitanni, who Thutmose III flirted with next. He crossed the Euphrates and raided a number of cities before leaving. Levantine tensions and further Mitanni-encouraged revolt would occur. Late into his reign, Hatshepsut's monuments came under attack, with her name and image removed and the breaking of her statues. Following Thutmose III came Amenhotep II, who ruled from 1427 to 1400. Amenhotep II campaigned in Syria as well, but under his reign, Egypt and Mitanni ceased vying against one another, and Egypt benefited with more comfortable resource extraction from Syria and Palestine, and more securely held Mediterranean ports. The king following Amenhotep II was Thutmose IV, who, while being Amenhotep's son, may not have been his chosen ruler. Either way, he ruled from 1400 to 1390. During his reign, a Nubian revolt was suppressed, and diplomatic ties with Mitanni climbed the rung with the sending of a Mitanni princess to be one of Thutmose's wives. With the end of his reign at 1390 BC, our subject matter ends and we leave Egypt having just come under the rule of Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III would be a great king in an age of great prosperity, and his son would be religiously passionate about the dazzlingly bright god, Aten, high above. For the moment, my intention is that we meet them and a whole lot more of the new kingdom in the coming video.